There once was a bird so numerous their flocks darkened the sky for hours, creating a deafening noise. This was the passenger pigeon, a great teeming spectacle of life. By 1900, not a single passenger pigeon remained in the wild. The last captive passenger pigeon died in 1914, completing the eradication of one of the most numerous bird species ever. The passenger pigeon is not missed today, but this was nothing less than an ecological catastrophe. The usual questions persist. How did this happen? And what does it mean for today? In the early 1800s, witnesses of migrating flocks of passenger pigeons stopped to quantify just how many birds those flocks contained. Estimates came in at a couple billion birds. Let's check the math. Start with a density of one bird per cubic yard, times a width of the flock of 500 feet, times a height of 250 feet, times a length of 100 miles, all modest dimensions, by the way, and divide through by 3 cubed to cancel out cubic yards. That equals 2.4 billion birds in a flock. Assuming other flocks existed of about the same size, the entire population of passenger pigeons, which ranged throughout the eastern U.S. and Canada, could have been as high as several billion birds. Chances were good that most everyone living at the time would have seen a flock at some point.
So the point is that even if you had no interest, there might well be a day that you're out running errands or doing your job, and suddenly for an hour or so the sky gets dark and you became aware of it. So I think that at least at the time, the living bird, people had a sense of it.
By comparison, today the most numerous wild bird species in the U.S. is the American robin, about 400 million birds spread across the entire continent, a minor fraction of the passenger pigeon numbers and density. Early on, the killing of passenger pigeons was minimal. Hunters, using either bow and arrow or shotguns, would fire their weapons into a flock without even aiming at anything in particular, and multiple birds would plummet to earth. Fine, this had no effect on population numbers. Later, the killing ramped up by trapping birds in large nets. Migrating birds would descend to the ground to roost for the night. Nets were set to cover large areas of the ground, thereby trapping hundreds of birds all at once. A trick used to attract flying birds down to a net was tying a living bird to a stool and jostling the stool to get the captive bird to flap its wings. The flapping indicated to flying birds that it was safe to land. This is the derivation of the term stool pigeon, or stoolie for short, meaning someone who betrays colleagues to authorities. Even more devious, the eyelids of the stool pigeons, still fully alive, were sewn shut so that they couldn't convey caution to the flying birds. Grim as netting was, it too had little, if any, effect on population numbers. Why were passenger pigeons killed at all? By their sheer numbers, passenger pigeons must have been a nuisance. At a minimum, farms flown over by a flock were turned into messes of guano, and entire crops could be lost if a flock alit for the night. Adult birds, weighing a couple pounds, were edible, and therefore pigeons were transported to markets and sold for food. Plus, live pigeons were used in the sport of skeet shooting. Upon being released from a cage, a pigeon would fly away in a desperate panic. The shooter would take aim and, more often than not, hit his target. If he missed, many spectators down the line would unload their guns on the escaping bird. Big-time killing commenced in the form of disrupting nesting sites. During spring migrations, millions of passenger pigeons would stop en masse to nest in large expanses of forest. Nesting would take 4 to 5 weeks and was a highly vulnerable time for all stages: adults, eggs, new chicks, and squabs, that is, adolescent birds that couldn't fly yet. With the advent of the train and the telegraph, it was possible for pigeoners to inform one another of when and where a nesting site was establishing. Adult pigeons were shot at close range while on the nest. Eggs were knocked out of low nests with sticks. Young chicks were allowed to grow to become squabs, and then the forest was set on fire. Flightless squabs, aflame, fell to the ground. A pivotal moment in the downward spiral of the passenger pigeon was 1871 at a nesting site 850 square miles in area in central Wisconsin, with an estimated 136 million adults. The killing didn't cease until nothing was left to kill. The final death toll, 1.2 million adults killed outright, and a near total loss of that year's reproduction cycle. This level of killing at nest sites was repeated in subsequent years, and even though the passenger pigeon still numbered in the hundreds of millions of birds, the species was effectively doomed by these nesting failures. Killing adult birds was one thing, but erasing whole nesting sites was quite another. The remaining timeline of the passenger pigeon was inevitable. 1880s, noticeably fewer pigeons, smaller migrating flocks. 1890s, no more large flocks. 1899, the last passenger pigeon seen in the wild, shot and killed. The 1900s, captive birds in zoos or private collections. 1914, the last known passenger pigeon, named Martha, died in the Cincinnati Zoo on September 1st, completing a great U.S. ecological catastrophe. A rationale lingers over this event. Yes, humans killed birds, but no, humans can't be blamed for killing off a whole species because it wasn't known back then that such an abundant species could go extinct. A pair of articles published in 1879 gave opposing views. On one hand, after noting massive losses at a nesting site the year before, a voice of concern concluded, quote, "The pigeon is threatened with extinction." On the other hand, a rebuttal said, quote, "The pigeon will never be exterminated as long as forests and food remain." In other words, it was known and knowable that the passenger pigeon was being driven to extinction, but that knowledge was ignored, if not denied. On the plus side of this story, the U.S. responded to the demise of the passenger pigeon with new laws protecting wild animals, including birds, as explained by environmental journalist Barry Yeoman.
The passenger pigeon was such a visible loss and was such a dramatic alteration of our landscape that we couldn't look away. And if you look at how the modern conservation movement evolved in the early 20th century, the passenger pigeon was evoked as a reason.
In 1903, the National Wildlife Refuge System was created, setting aside places where wildlife was off limits to hunting. The first refuge, Pelican Island, Florida, set aside to protect pelicans and egrets. In 1913, the Weeks-McLean Act ended hunting of birds during nesting, and it stopped the slaughter of egrets just for their long feathers, which were being made into hats. In 1972, the Endangered Species Act went further, declaring that animals have a right to exist, that species in danger of extinction should be protected, and that habitats should be set aside to help species survive. The ESA was an extraordinary change of heart. For example, wolves went from being purposefully exterminated to being bred in captivity and then released back into the wild. Even though the eradication of the passenger pigeon occurred long ago, lessons from this catastrophe still resonate today. Birds in general are in trouble today. Since 1970, there has been a decline of some 3 billion birds across all species. Multiple causes exist for this die-off, none of which is easy to reverse. Ecological catastrophes are exceedingly slow to develop, making them difficult to notice as they are occurring. This makes it hard to take action in time to avert catastrophes, because they aren't obvious until it's too late. Denial can be a strong tendency of human nature. The notion that a species so populous could be driven to extinction was denied in the 1800s as absurd. Denial is no less strong today on issues like global warming, for example. The story of the passenger pigeon was not a case of nature taking its course, or of a species going extinct. Rather, it was eradication, the purposeful driving of a species to extinction. Same end result, perhaps, but quite different causes and different meanings for today. Either way, the eradication of the passenger pigeon makes our list of great U.S. ecological catastrophes.